See, yesterday, despite a deliberate filibuster by our Conservative colleagues, Liberal members of the Heritage Committee were finally able to publicly share the social media amendments to Bill C-10 while respecting parliamentary privilege. To those who were worried about any free speech restrictions, these amendments would give our regulator the power to ask one question and impose two types of obligations. The question is, how much revenue does your platform make in Canada? The obligations are to invest a certain percentage of that platform's Canadian revenues into our cultural production funds. And second, to promote and make discoverable our artists, our stories, and our shared experiences. Practically, this would mean that companies like YouTube would pay a portion of their Canadian revenues into Canadian music funds like Factor and Musique Action, and that the platform would have to make accessible Canadian music and stories. That is all. Anybody telling you otherwise is mistaken. En plus de ces amendements, le projet de loi exempte déjà explicitement les individus de toute obligation comme stipulé à la section 2.1. Bill C-10 isn't about what Canadians do online. It's about web giants don't do in Canada, which is support Canadian works, languages, stories, and music. Finally, I hope today's committee session will be more productive and collaborative. Our country and our creators deserve better than what the Conservative Party is doing right now, wasting this precious time. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Bruson. We're now ready to take questions.
And we'll now take questions, starting with questions on the phone. Quick reminder to reporters, one question, one follow-up. Nous allons maintenant passer aux questions. En commençant par les questions au téléphone, un petit rappel, une question suivie par journaliste, comme à l'habitude. Opérateur, avons-nous une première question?
We do have a first question. Nous avons une première question. It is from Anja Karadiglia from National Post. Please go ahead. Your line is open. Parole est à vous.
Yes. Hi. I wanted to ask about the discoverability requirements. How do you imagine the CRTC using these? Can you maybe give us more detail about what we're talking about here?
Yeah, thank you. And I think that question is really important about what the obligations would be, because there was quite a bit of conversation that leading up. So the first point is I want to reiterate the point that 2.1 specifically excludes users from the Broadcast Act, and to highlight that point. As far as the discoverability, I'll go to the amendment directly, which is that online undertakings that provide a social media service would have to highlight the discoverability of Canadian creators of programs. Practically, what that means is that when suggesting, for example, songs for a playlist, and this would have to be decided by the CRTC, but that YouTube would have to, on occasion, from time to time, suggest Canadian creators. But that is a limit to what the discoverability obligation is. It isn't an obligation that a certain amount of Canadian production be played, just that there would be perhaps recommendations, for example.
Follow-up?
And I know that it's, you say that the government doesn't think that has any free speech implications, but some people do disagree. They've said that anything that has the CRTC controlling, I'm thinking of a couple of privacy lawyers or a couple of internet lawyers, saying that anything that the government does or the CRTC does to influence what Canadians see online or to control, like if you log into YouTube and if the CRTC is controlling the results that you see, that amounts to a potential violation of free expression or free speech, that the CRTC is meddling where it shouldn't be. I guess I just wanted your response to people that have said they still have concerns with the bill, even with this new amendment.
First, I'd like to suggest that we have to look at a range of expert opinions. And when I say that, for example, Professor Pierre Trudel was a Wilson Chair in Information Technology and E-commerce Law. He published an article this week in Le Devoir that specifically was titled that there was no risk to freedom of expression with Bill C-10. So there's a range of opinions out there and a range of expert opinions on the topic. But in addition, when it comes to freedom of expression, let's take two steps back. The Broadcast Act has been in place for maybe about 50 years in this version for 30 years. It's the Broadcast Act that governs television and radio, just like the conversations that we are having today. What I would like to know when people are saying that these rules, much restricted rules for social media that we have put in place, social media companies, by the way, when I say that, how does it impede free speech to require these social media companies to tell the CRTC how much revenue their platform makes in Canada, and to have an obligation to invest a percentage of those Canadian revenues in cultural production funds, and to promote and make discoverable our artists? How does that impede freedom of speech?
I mean, the argument is that it does because the CRTC is controlling what Canadians see online when they go to TikTok or YouTube or whatever. Sorry, I know I didn't have a follow-up. I just did want to follow up because you asked a question that I'm thinking that
Yeah.
is concerned.
But if I can, on that point, I think that if you look at the amendment that was tabled yesterday, it clearly doesn't impose those requirements. It really clearly doesn't. And I would ask that, everyone refer to the amendment that was made, because it doesn't impose those requirements.
Operator, next question.
Thank you. Merci. There are no further questions registered at this time. Il n'y a plus de questions à ce moment-ci.
Maybe just do one final reminder how to connect.
Certainly, certainement. For any questions on the telephone lines, please press *1 on the device's keypad. Pour toute question au téléphone, faire étoile 1 sur votre appareil. We have another question, and again, it is from Anja Caradeglia from National Post.
Go ahead.
Please go again.
Another follow-up to what you just said, that the amendment doesn't do that. And I think that, it doesn't, it does when it comes to discoverability specifically. So it's not that it says, what you can say online or on YouTube or whatever. It's that it says, when I go on YouTube, I'm going to see, I have to see a certain percentage of Canadian content or Canadian creators or whatever. Like, that's the idea behind it. So I think that when they say that the concern is CRTC controlling what people see online, it's not, that the CRTC says what you can say or you can't say. It's kind of literally controlling the content that's presented to you that is discoverable by you, right? So I just wanted to kind of put that criticism to you again, like really specifically in terms of people what are saying, just to see if you have any additional responses to people who say that still amounts, like discoverability requirements still amount to freedom of expression issue.
And that's, I'm happy that you've actually followed up with that, because it just to clarify, there isn't an obligation. When you look at the amendment that was tabled, there is not an obligation to present a certain percentage of Canadian productions. It is the wording is actually quite clear in the amendment that it is that a requirement for the social media companies to provide for the discoverability of Canadian creators and programs. It is not a percentage of what would appear in your news feed. It is the requiring social media web giants who work as broadcasters, when they act as broadcasters, to abide by certain specific rules that are very tailored and specific for this social media web giants. And so it does not impose a percentage requirement of content to be shown. And I think that that is a really important distinction that we need to focus on, which is that there isn't that percentage.
And if you wish to follow up, please.
Yeah, sorry, I know that it doesn't. I mean, C10 in general doesn't include those specifics because it leads into the CRTC. But I mean, the idea is that the CRTC would put in place more specific rules, for example, around the percentage of Canadian content, right? Or do I have that wrong?
I would believe that you are mistaken on that. When I look at these amendments, the way that it works for social media web giants is quite tailored and does not require percentage of content that would be Canadian. That's not what the amendment says at all.
Operator, do we have a next question?
Thank you. Merci. Next question is from Gina Kukul from The Wire Report. Please go ahead. Your line is open. À vous la parole.
Yes, good morning. I was just wondering if you could clarify at what point do social media platforms like YouTube act like a broadcaster?
Well, I was looking at something that apparently the head of music from YouTube said in an interview a little while ago, that 80% of the content that was listened to on YouTube came from their recommendations. So just to put that out there, but when social media companies act as broadcasters, we're asking that they contribute to the Canadian production system, that a certain percentage of the revenues that they make from doing that. This is not about users being regulated in any way. In fact, they are specifically excluded by 2.1 that's already been confirmed in the Act.
Follow up?
No, thank you.
All right. Operator, do we have a next question?
Thank you. Merci. Yes, we do. It is from Anja Karadaglia from National Post. Please go ahead. Your line is open. À vous la parole.
I feel like this is turning into a one-on-one interview, but I did just want to follow up on what you said about, this isn't about percentages of Canadian content. And I've been following Bill C10 for a long time, and, whenever we talk about discoverability, it's generally about making sure that, there's a certain amount of Canadian content that people can see, that they can discover on these platforms. So I just wanted to follow up and ask if it's not about ensuring, if the intent behind this amendment is not to ensure that the CRTC can say, 30% of the catalog has to have Canadian content or whatever, like what is the intent behind it to allow the CRTC to do? When you say, you want to see discoverability, or the CRTC to be able to issue orders related to discoverability requirements, and it's not percentage of content, like what do you mean by discoverability in that case?
Well, again, just to highlight, because the difference is with the amendments that were put forward yesterday, the rules for social media companies are distinct. So it's not the same types of rules that you may have seen as far as percentages. There are no percentages required for social media companies. And there's quite a clear carve out with the amendments that were put forward yesterday. And that is just the need that Canadian creators of programs are discoverable. And quite frankly, like when we look at that, how would it impede freedom of expression to ask that Canadian creators be discoverable? It's what what we need is just, we're asking that Canadian artists are recommended. And I would like to bring that to the heart of what the modernization of the Broadcasting Act is about. This is about making sure that we are supporting and promoting our Canadian creators, and making sure that in a world where um, you know streaming sources have become an important means by which people access their music and their film and their television, that we are creating a fair playing field for our Canadian creative industries. That's an important place to be. We need to make sure that we stand by our Canadian creators, and that we continue to provide a modernized and fair playing field for their work.
And follow up.
Operator, last question, please.
Thank you. Merci. Next question is from Janet Silver from iPolitics. Your line is open. À vous la parole.
Thank you, and thank you for taking our questions. My first one is with regards to the collection of the funds from big tech and how that works. Is that something that the CRTC is responsible for? Is there one massive fund, and then who looks after the distribution of whatever is collected from those big tech companies?
Well, there are different development funds, and the CRTC decides how that works. But we have considerable experience in Canada with the Canada Media Fund, a Factor, Musique Action. That's the traditional way that funds have been distributed to the creative industries.
Okay. And my follow-up is with regards, you began today by saying that you hope that there's a way to move forward in the meeting this afternoon. I'm just wondering, where do you go from here if the insistence is on the charter review now? What do you propose to get beyond that so you can get back into clause by clause consideration?
I believe that the next step is for the Conservatives to end the filibuster so that we can actually get to voting on a motion about that. Right now, we haven't been able to get to that stage, and that is where the delay is. But the issue is, let's get to the motion, let's have the vote, and let's move forward. And as I mentioned before, I am confident that this bill is strong and will be supported by a charter review. But let's do it. Let's do it. Let's get the charter review. Let's get to that motion. Let's get to that vote. And in the meantime, let's not stop the work of reviewing clause by clause, because we need to keep working through it and making sure that there is a full piece that we can put forward for that charter review.